Captain, the sensors are picking up 2 other ships.
The Refit Enterprise D may have been from an alternate future, but it ends up happening, so it's canon. It's also got a big cannon. This video is on the Enterprise D refit that appeared in the final episode of The Next Generation All Good Things. Here we'll touch on its background information, modifications made to the existing model to get this ship, and ponder some tangential what-if scenarios. This is the All Good Things Enterprise D refit. Let's start off with some quick background information so that we're all on the same page. Like any weirdo Star Trek fan knows, this ship only appeared in the final half of the final episode of The Next Generation All Good Things. We're about 25 years into the future, well, their future. Picard and most of the old gang are aboard the USS Pasteur, which is being attacked by some Klingon ships. It doesn't do too well. A red shirt dies and all hope looks lost when the Refit Enterprise D decloaks, destroys one of the Klingon ships, and sends the other one retreating.
Captain, another ship is decloaking. It's the Enterprise.
Here we have it, the future Enterprise D. Clearly, it's the same ship that we've seen in the entire series, only with a lot of extra stuff added. It's the Enterprise D in turbo pursuit mode. We'll take a close look at these modifications in a few minutes. As we just saw, it has a cloaking device. It doesn't really factor into the story though, but it gives the ship a badass introduction. Later, Admiral Riker reveals that the Enterprise was to be retired about 5 years earlier.
Ship has held up pretty well over the years.
They tried to decommission her about 5 years ago.
Though it takes out this Klingon attack cruiser in about 6 seconds. So maybe that ship was going to be decommissioned too. By the way, the Future 10 Forward is mostly unchanged. They removed this weird Asian broom looking thing. And the background wall art is new. Everything is the same, even the doors which have the TNG era Starfleet insignia, which they stopped using about 25 years earlier in Generations. It's almost as if Generations never happened. I guess that's because Generations didn't happen.
I'm finding it difficult to concentrate.
The Enterprise D was destroyed in that movie, so obviously it wouldn't have survived to exist in this version of the future. We'll get into the actual modifications seen here in a moment, but first let's indulge in some make-believe time. Or as I like to call it, the nerdiest thing you'll do today. If the Enterprise D was to be decommissioned a few years prior to this, was a new starship waiting in the wings to be christened the Enterprise E? Well, this episode takes place around the year 2395. In Star Trek Online, the game for Star Trek fans who like to grind, the Enterprise F is launched in 2409. That's about a 15-year gap between that and 2395, so maybe it would have looked something like this. But let's back up the geek train a little bit. If the Enterprise D survived Generations, it would have seen some refits at some point. Looking at the Sovereign class for some visual cues, we can see that the Starfleet aesthetic was progressing. Here's the standard Galaxy class. Now let's swap out the nacelles for some newer ones. The bridge domes are interchangeable in Star Trek lore, so let's swap this one out for a new one. Then we'll add a shuttle bay in the aft, and make some other tweaks like adding these scoops to the hull. So maybe this is how the Enterprise D fit would have looked? The more I look at it, I like how the longer nacelles gives the ship a greater sense of balance. You know, this has been the best use of time in the history of sarcasm. The ship we see here is the legendary 4-foot Enterprise D model. This is the second primary filming model of the Enterprise D manufactured. Seasons 1 and 2 used the more detailed and sophisticated 6-foot model, but that one became too cumbersome to use for all the visual effects shots needed for a weekly TV series. This 4-foot model was much easier to mount, light, and film with. Immediately, it became the next go-to model for the showmakers for the rest of the series. Here's a quick rundown in case you're not already aware. In a nutshell, this new 4-foot model had more hull texture and a thicker saucer rim. There's some other minor differences, but those are the two easiest ways to discern the 6-foot model from the 4-foot one. Longtime TNG effects artists Greg Jean and Dan Curry handled modifying the 4-foot model to what we see in this episode. They created about a dozen pieces which were added to the existing model to complete the transformation. Traditionally, a task like this would be accomplished by using some model parts from other ships, otherwise known as kit bashing, and not to be confused with kit bashing.
Smells like Hasselhoff.
Anyway, after looking at these pieces, I can't really recognize any familiar pieces from other ships, but if you know otherwise, slap that down in the comments. In any case, here's a rundown of these pieces and where they went. Fins were added to both the port and starboard pylons. Flanking them are phaser strips above and below, so 4 in total. Caps with more phaser strips were added to the top of the 3 nacelles. On the ventral side of the saucer, this giant cannon was added. It extends all the way to the back of the neck. The whole registry number was repositioned to accommodate this thing, and thin red pinstripes were added to various other sections of the hull. This beam from the giant cannon shoots right under the ship. I imagine that it's a terrifying view from 10 forward when you're sitting there peacefully trying to enjoy your green drink. Atop the saucer section, a twin torpedo launcher was added. This is placed directly behind the bridge dome, giving anyone in the observation lounge a pretty unnerving view as well. In case this thing didn't already have enough weapons, flanking the bridge are 2 additional phaser cannons. That makes 12 additional weapons added. The 4 phaser strips on the pylons, the 3 dorsal phasers on the nacelles, the 2 dorsal torpedo launchers behind the bridge, these 2 phaser cannons, and this giant one on the bottom. I guess you can't have too many weapons when you're on the bad side of the Klingon Empire. Though the most eye-catching modification is the 3rd nacelle, it's attached to the drive section with this extension. Judging from the rows of windows, this added about 10 decks to the drive section. It also has new impulse exhausts and an aft shuttle bay. This entire piece has independent lighting as well. It looks like it only lights the nacelle though because the lights aren't on in any of the shots in the show. Each of these modifications were removable, and they were. You can see this bulge here, which likely came from when this part was removed from the main model. These pieces were auctioned off in 2015 for over $11,000. That's just for these pieces and not the entire 4-foot model. 2 of these modification pieces were reused on the USS Venture. It's another Galaxy-class ship that we see on DS9. The top nacelle caps were turned around, with the wider end in front that tapers as you move back. I also like to point out that we see another Galaxy-class ship from yet another alternate future. It's the USS Challenger, whose captain is Geordi LaForge in the Voyager episode Timeless. This uses the CG model, so this ship doesn't have any of these all good things modifications lingering around. Speaking of lingering, this video has gone on for long enough. So that's the video. We get a few looks at the ship's interior as well. I cover the bridge modifications in this other video. If you want to stay in the loop for future videos, feel free to gently tap on that subscribe button. I'd like to thank these removable modifications for helping support the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.